I'm going to stand down here. Y'all gave me so much room this morning that I can be down here. I was going to start with, so here's the question. How many of you have New Year's resolutions? So go ahead and start thinking about that question, okay? Because I wasn't going to start with telling of anything else, and then Jim called in and said, hey, I probably need to quarantine. And so it was rather last-minute change. And so anyways, our singing was a little different this morning, but y'all just do so good with that. So good, I tell you what. Proud of y'all. Anyways, New Year's resolution. So we want to be praying for Jim, Renee. I don't know if they've tested positive or not, but they're quarantined. We got a lot of people who are quarantined, tested positive, out sick in some way, form, and or fashion. So just be mindful of all that. So, New Year's resolution. How many of you started this year with a New Year's resolution? Anybody? I got one. Thank you. I got one New Year's resolution. No one else. Thank you, too. You never keep them. Isn't that amazing? How many of you have started a New Year's resolution and by 6 weeks in realized that you did not keep it? I think all of us are getting our hands up on that one. I mean, we have all started with a New Year's resolution. I'll tell you one of mine, and this is one that I've thought about a lot recently. In 2019, I preached a sermon at the start of the year here at this church where I talked about a New Year's resolution to lose weight, and guess what happened? It didn't happen. And I look at about July of this past year, and I look and I say, you know what? Maybe God is telling me that I should have been keeping my word. But anyways, that's a story for another time. I look at this New Year's resolution. There was an article in U.S. News, it's new at usnews.com. It was dated 2015 that said that 80% of New Year's resolutions are not kept. I thought, 80%? That's a lot. If I've got $1, that's only 20 cents on the dollar that's actually staying faithful to a New Year's resolution. And as I thought about that, I was reading the article, and does anyone know why New Year's resolutions were not kept?
Unrealistic goals.
That actually wasn't the primary reason, but unrealistic goals. Maybe that's one of them. Maybe that's one that we've set. We say, oh man, I want to be chiseled and be 100 and I don't know whatever chiseled would look like, 180 pounds, y'all can laugh at it. Somewhere underneath all this flubber, there's a chiseled man. Maybe it's unrealistic goals. What else? Not healthy. Not held accountable. There's no one there who's saying, hey, are you doing it? Are you sticking with it? Not held accountable. That wasn't the primary reason. But man, that happens to me too. If there's not someone calling up saying, hey, Josh, what's going on? Yeah. I just forgot about it. Oh, how many of you have started a New Year's resolution and said, January 1, I'm going to do this year, and about January 10th, you're like, I just now remembered that this is what I was going to do. Has anyone else been in that boat? Oh, I have. Okay, there we go. As we think about New Year's resolution, the primary reason, and this was like I said, it's usnews.com from 2015. I think it was December. I don't remember. But was that the number one reason that New Year's resolutions failed, 80% of them failed, was because the person did not have the mental fortitude in place before they started. They had a goal. They had something that they established that they wanted to do. They had it either said in front of them or maybe they wrote it down. Most people don't write those things down, but most of them would say it, but they didn't prepare their mind. They weren't mentally prepared for what was about to happen. And so I realized that in our New Year's resolutions, as a church, maybe we have set some New Year's resolutions. Maybe as a Christian, as an individual, we have set some New Year's resolutions, and in those resolutions, 80% of those fail because we weren't mentally prepared. We weren't right upstairs. As I look at mental preparation, particularly for this new year, I realize that 2022, and I think I have 2022 as a slide, 2022 is a great year. I'm looking at it as a phenomenal year. But I'm the eternal optimist. But I know that some people, and some of you might be those people. I'm going to make fun of you for a minute then. Some of you people look at 2022 in a different way. Let's throw the next slide up real quick. Some of you see 2022 like this. It's 2020 part 2. And y'all remember what happened in 2020, don't you? We won't talk about it. Maybe it'll bring back. It's the thing which you do not mention. You don't want to mention 2020. And some of us look at 2022 as if it's 2020 part 2, and we're already worried. Man, we've already got stinking thinking, Mike. We've already created a negative year, and we've already said, oh my goodness, what's going to happen in this next year? What's going to go on? What more trouble could be had? And we've already started looking at 2022 from this perspective of, man, it's going to be a bad year. So as a church, as a people, as Christians, for those of you who are online with us, I want to encourage you to do the same thing. Make 2022 the year of positive thinking, the year where we're going to go to it exciting. Now, if we're going to go into something and we're going to be excited about it, and we're going to be looking for the positive, and we're going to be looking for goodness in 2022, we have to be mentally prepared for this, do we not? So that means we need to erase off the 2020 part 2 idea. We've got to be mentally prepared for great things to happen this coming year. And as we're going to be mentally prepared for great things to happen this year, I have what I think is part 1 of our advice. This is basically a 4-part series where I'm going to try and give bits of advice for how to make 2022 an incredible year. And the first bit of advice, the primary thing I want to leave you with, is that we need to listen and ask questions. Listen and ask questions. Can you say those 2 words with me? Listen and ask questions. Actually, I guess that's 3 words, isn't it? You got the point. Listen and ask questions. Now, I'm going to share a story. When I was a teenager, we lived on 40 acres, way out in the middle of nowhere. We had horses. And so but I share with that detail because the front of our property had an electric fence on it. I got some people that already just got a little excited on that. We had an electric fence on the front of the property, so the horses didn't get out. Like, it was cheap to run an electric fence, so we had an electric fence. Anyways, I had been told, and mind you, I'm 16. I've done some work. So I'm not completely ignorant, but I have been told not to touch the electric fence. Anyone ever been told not to touch the electric fence? Okay. I was told not to touch the electric fence. Now, our particular electric fence had this click to it. It was in the barn. It was hooked up out in the barn. And so you'd hear this click. And that was the pulse going through it. So I always could hear the click. And I always knew that it was on. Now, does anyone know the number 1 rule of electricity? Well, I guess don't ground. It's kind of like the number 1 rule of a gun. What's the number 1 rule of a gun? Always assume it's loaded. With electricity, you always assume that it's live until you can prove otherwise. Well, one day I didn't hear the click. There was no click coming from the barn. The electric fence I knew was down. It was on the ground, and I thought, well, I probably better fix this. The horses were afraid. They weren't going to run through it. They were scared to death of it. But I was like, I probably need to pick this up, and I probably need to fix this. Can anyone imagine for a moment? Some of you can. Can anyone imagine the moment that wire left the ground and I became its ground? Anyone been shocked by an electric fence? Okay, we got a couple of you brave souls here. As I think about that story in particular, I have been told from the time that we moved to that property and put the electric fence in, don't touch the electric fence. There's a handle on a gate that you can touch. It's safe. Don't touch the electric fence. I had been told with the fence that you always assume it's plugged in unless you go and unplug it, which I'd unplug it sometimes to work on it. This time I did not. I realized that I never listened. And then I didn't ask the question, is this thing really plugged in? I should probably check this out. You know, I come to this story and I want us to go to Luke chapter 2. That's really the text that I want us to focus on. Luke chapter 2, and we're going to look at 2 verses today, 46 and 47. Luke 2, 46 and 47. Jesus, and the narrative around this is when Jesus is at the temple. He's the 12-year-old boy. I thought about talking about how many of you parents have lost your children before, and I know that Denise has a excruciating story about losing a child. You know, some of us have had stories where we've lost our children in a department store, and you say, where are they at? And you just don't know, and it's paralyzing. I don't want to focus on that. You can get that another time. 46 and 47. I want to focus, instead of focusing on Mary and Joseph, instead of focusing on the friends and the family that probably come back to help find Jesus, instead of focusing on the fact that Jesus stayed in Jerusalem, I want to focus on Jesus. 46 starts off with, after a 3-day period, they found him. By the way, they've traveled back to Jerusalem. He was in the temple court sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking questions. Let's go ahead and go throw listening up on the screen. Listening, and then the next word is asking. Let's throw asking up, asking them questions. And everyone who heard him was amazed at his understanding and his answers. I notice in this passage that Jesus was listening and asking questions. Here is the Savior of the world, God in the flesh, listening, sitting among some other people and learning. And as I think about, I guess to some way, the beauty of that, the gravity of that, I can't help but wonder, why was he listening and asking? Mind you, Jesus is 12 at this point. He's a relatively young boy. Do we have a 12-year-old that I could point to and could say, you're 12? Colin's 12? No? Dennis is 12? Dennis will be 12. Dennis, wave your hand up. Just wave it up. There we go. There's our 12-year-old. So Dennis is playing Jesus now. And he is listening and asking questions. I realize that this is happening well before Jesus started his ministry. Jesus was 30 when he started his ministry. So we're easily 18 years before Jesus' ministry. And 18 years before he starts his ministry, he is still capable of intellectually understanding and comprehending and discussing topics with people that go far above probably what we can understand, what we could even grasp. And as I think about those two words in 46, I have to say, oftentimes, it's kind of like me and the electric fence. We just don't quite listen. Mama ever tell you to do something and you did the opposite of it? Mama ever tell you to do something and you did the opposite? Okay, I got a couple of hands. There are times in our life where Mama told us to do something or not to do something, and we didn't listen. It wasn't that we had a problem with our ears. Our ears were functioning. Some of you may have the non-functioning ear problem, and that might get you a little bit of an excuse. Most of the time, it's our ears are functioning. It's not the problem with the ear. It's the problem with what's between the ears. Actually saying, this is what I need to do. And most of the time, it's because we don't listen. We're too busy already thinking about what our response is going to be. We're too busy concerned about where we're going to go next, what our next meal is going to be, how we're going to get there. We're more concerned about all these other things that we don't stop to listen. I think we would listen more and actually comprehend more. We might understand a little bit more. But you see, we also don't question. I don't think we question enough. You see, when I stand up here and talk, part of your job as an audience right now is to be questioning. Is Josh speaking truth? Is there something that Josh is saying that does or doesn't make sense? And if so, I should question it. And by the way, I don't know if I've ever really hindered anybody who said, hey, Josh, I've got a legitimate question right now. Even in the middle of a sermon, I wouldn't stop a question. Because your job as a listener is to be evaluating and examining. You are to be looking at and studying your scriptures to know exactly what's going on and to say, wait a second, is what he's saying correct? And then to be asking questions. So when Jesus is asking questions of these teachers, what do you think he's asking them? Can you imagine he's sitting in a room full of very smart people? These are all people who've got their law degree, by the way. These people are brilliant. You ever met a lawyer who would teach a Bible class? Man, Mike just did You know, a good lawyer or anyone who has that mind, it's that mind where they can just, I don't know what it is. They can dig down into a text and can bring it out in a way that just never really seemed to happen to me. These guys are brilliant. And Jesus is sitting there and he's listening. And I realize that our first problem is that we don't stop to listen. And then I realize our second problem is we often don't stop to ask questions. What kind of questions do you think Jesus asked? What questions would he ask? You know, I think there's this teaching that there are no things as stupid questions. Anyone ever hear that as a student in school? It's not true. It's not true. Any teacher that ever told you that was lying. They were telling you that just so that you would feel comfortable. Because everyone knows there are some stupid questions. Do you think Jesus was asking stupid questions? Do you think Jesus is sitting at the feet of these brilliant minds and asking a dumb question? No, I think when he was asking questions, I think he was searching for something. I think he was wanting to understand something. And so he begins to ask the questions so that he can better understand things. Oh, by the way, this brings up a really great point. We sometimes believe that Jesus was born into this world with osmosis of knowledge that just automatically granted him the ability to know and understand his role. If we believe that Jesus was born into this world with this osmosis knowledge that just he popped out of Mary and said, you know what, I know who I am and I know who I'm here to serve and I already know all the law because I was there at creation. If that happened, then that kind of gives Jesus an upper hand, doesn't it? Makes it unfair. I have to believe that Jesus had the same opportunities as you and I did. That he is just as much human as we are. So that means that when he was a 12-year-old boy, he wasn't certifiably brilliant. He might have been, we don't know. But he wasn't certifiably brilliant to the point where he just said, oh, you know what, I remember the day that creation happened. I was there, and so I can already tell you exactly what happened. I already can tell you the law because I had it memorized because, oh, well, I wrote it. He's not that person. He's the 12-year-old boy who's sitting there and who is studying the Scriptures so that he can understand it. He is studying and learning and asking questions so that he can have a better grasp of it. He was listening. He was asking questions. So my major point for us, my thing that I want you to have today, is that as we're going into 2020, first and foremost, there is nothing wrong with stopping and asking questions, stopping and listening. There's nothing wrong. Before we enter into 2022, I said 2021, didn't I? Before we enter into 2022, with saying, I'm going to do nothing more than listen and ask questions. I want to get a groundwork. I want to get my feet underneath me. I want to know what's going on before I enter into it. How old was Jesus when he started his ministry? 30. How old is he in our account right now? 12. We rush things so often. We're so focused on getting through something and getting to the next step and the next phase and moving on. We rush our entire lives. Jesus was brilliant at age 12. But there's still 18 years of study and Sunday church service and mama's cooking and learning from daddy. There are still 18 more years beyond that where he is engulfing himself in scriptures. He's not even baptized till he's 30. We rush. Not that I want you to all sit back and take it so easy that you never take an action, but we rush. And I think the point of 2022, if I'm going to create a success strategy for us, if we want 2022 to be an incredible year, my challenge for us is that maybe 2022 needs to be the year where before we jump in, before we say this is what we're going to do, before we just run into it yelling, I'm coming in for you, we stop and we say, I'm going to listen. And I'm going to ask questions. And I'm going to learn. Something I notice is really in verse 47, and that brings up really my second thought for today, is that Jesus surrounded himself with smart people. So surround yourself with smart people. You know, if I want to be a smarter individual, it makes sense to surround myself with smart people. If I want to be a meth addict, what does it make sense to put myself around? It makes sense to put myself with a meth addict. If that's what I want in my life, then I should put myself with that type of person, and I should hang around that type of person, and I should have the goal and the desire of mimicking their life. I don't know if any of you have the desire to be a meth addict this morning. I pray not. I do hope that each one of us has the desire to be a smarter individual this year, to maybe be a more godly individual this year, to be a more patient individual this year. Can you develop patience if you're with a hothead? It's possible. But is it preferable? If I want to be a patient individual, who do I hang around with? I find a patient person. And so as I'm looking at these situations, I realize that Jesus stopped, he listened, and he asked questions. And when he asked these questions, he surrounded himself with smart people. And those smart people helped provide the answers to those questions. Now, how does this apply to us? Oftentimes, we don't stop and listen. We are so busy looking for the next thing. We're so busy trying to solve the problem, create the solution, that we don't stop, we don't listen. And oftentimes, when we're in this phase of life that we're trying to not listen, we're not going to ask for help. And if we ask for help, who are we going to ask? People who can't solve the problem. Let me give you some examples of problems that I think we have created by not stopping, listening, and asking questions. I'm going to bring up some just big topics. And not because they're particular, not because they have easy answers. Racism, genocide, rape, all the other bad stuff that we can come up with in our list of problems with the world. Come up with a full list of them. And as we were to go through the list of really bad things, I would ask the question, have we ever stopped and listened to the problems? Too busy, even our government. Governmental idea is let's just throw money at it, or let's find a solution to it. And maybe the solutions are more complex than we've created. Maybe the problems are more complex than what we're prepared to handle. And we don't ask the right questions. We don't seek out wise people. You know, another problem is that sometimes when we're seeking out people, I seek out a peer, someone who can understand, who can empathize with me, but not someone who's going to challenge me. Not someone who's going to make me a better person. What about this question? God, if you're all powerful, why did you allow this person to die? Anyone ever asked that question? Don't raise your hands. God, if you're all powerful, why did you give cancer as the diagnosis? God, if you're all powerful, why? And oftentimes when we ask the tough questions of life, our response is never to ask God. Well, I guess in a way we're kind of asking Him, but we're not looking for His response. We're not going to stop and listen. And sometimes when we ask the tough questions of life, we surround ourselves with other people who all could say, God, why? And there's seldom a person who's around us that would say, maybe that's the wrong question. Seldom do we surround ourselves with someone who has the knowledge, the experience, or the wisdom to guide us into a deeper knowledge of who God is. So sometimes we lose faith when we realize that maybe the questions we've been asking are the wrong questions, and maybe the faith that we've been having is the wrong faith. When I look at what Jesus is doing here, He never rushed into His ministry. He didn't rush into the new year with the excitement of taking on like just a beast wanting to challenge. He took a lot of time in preparation, making sure that he was ready for what God had called him to. And the tough questions of life, the tough problems that you're going to experience, the challenges that we face as humans are tough problems. The challenge, the weight that you carry as a person, it's a heavy weight. And oftentimes the answer is not just put a smile on your face and get over it. The challenge is difficult. And that's where I would challenge us as a people to listen, to ask questions, but ask questions of smart people. People who will make us better. People who will push us to strive to be more than who we are today. People who will honestly look out for our betterment. Now, I've got a few, I guess if I were to say few audiences that I want to speak to. The first audience is if you're here today or if you're joining us online today and you are brand new to the idea of Christianity. If you've never really heard a lot or you know a little bit but you're unfamiliar. If you're a person who is questioning whether or not you should pursue a relationship with God, if you're questioning what this God even is, here's my advice. Don't rush. Man, some of us are going to try and give you a 5-step plan. We're going to try and get you dunked in some water, and we're going to try to get you on the way because we love putting people in the water. We love baptism, and we are so excited when any soul chooses to commit their life to Christ. We love it with a passion that is so exciting for us. Don't rush it. Listen. Ask the questions that need to be asked. Don't rush. Take your time to understand who the God is that you're committing yourself to. And don't be ashamed of the time that it takes. Because sometimes it takes time. For my second audience. This is for you who, let's say you've been a Christian now maybe 5 years. You know, you're going on and, or maybe you're ready. You're saying, I'm ready to make the commitment. I am prepared to give my life to Christ. Maybe I'm even an early Christian. I was baptized within the last year or two, and I am eager. And I'm going to say to the person who is eager, suck as much knowledge up as you can. Sleep with the Bible under your pillow at night if that helps you. Do whatever it takes for you to get more of God within you. Surround yourself with smart people, but surround yourself with people who exhibit the fruits of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Surround yourself with people who are wise in the ways of God and learn from those people. Oh, if I wanted to be a meth addict, I would surround myself with meth addicts. If I want to be a godly individual, I surround myself with godly people. Surround yourself with godly people and ask the questions and listen to their advice. Now for my third group. This is my final group. If you've been a Christian for let's just say 5 years, 5 years plus, and by the way, there's no exact time frame to this. We're all a little different. If you're a Christian, you've been a Christian for, let's say, 5 years. You were baptized, what's the 2022? What's 2022 minus 5, Russ? 17? 17? Yeah, 2017. There we go. I almost said 1917, but that'd have been a little off then. 2017. If you were baptized in 2017 or earlier, this is for you. I'm all for taking your time. I'm all for growing and listening and learning and absorbing the knowledge. But the Hebrew author would tell us in Hebrews chapter, well, I didn't write it down. Oh, man. No, I did. Sorry. Wrong page of my notes. Hebrews chapter 5, I think. Yeah, 5 verse 12. It says that Hebrews chapter 5 verse 12, and by this time you ought to be teachers. You need someone to yet again teach you the elementary principles again. If you have been a Christian for 5 years, I'm all for you listening. You need to listen. I'm all for you asking questions because we all need to learn. We all need to grow. But I'm going to take the advice from the book of Hebrews and say that if you've been a Christian for 5 years, you need to have learned something and you need to be teaching other people. You need to be mentoring other people. You need to be the wise voice that's walking with some people through the challenges of this life. You know this life is tough. You know this life is hard. You need to be a person who is walking with somebody through those challenges. You should be the wise person in the group. So I don't know where you're at this morning. I don't know what group you fit into. And honestly, I don't care. That's between you and God. You and God have to determine where you're at. But I will say this. Jesus was 12 in this moment, and he was brilliant. He knew the Bible well. You give him 18 more years, and he's going to change the world. He's going to save the world. But even Jesus had to be pushed into his ministry. Remember John 2, the water to wine story, where Jesus turns water to wine? Mary goes up and asks him, and he says, hey, or Mary says, hey, Jesus, don't embarrass this couple. They need more wine. And Jesus says, it's not my time. That's him saying, I can't do this. And then he does it. Sometimes it takes a push. So I don't know where you're at. If you're in that first group where you're just starting to be acquainted, we want to walk with you. If you're that second group where you're just wanting to be a sponge and absorb, we want to walk with you and push you. If you're in that third group, I want to be a good little strong arm on your back, pushing you into the service of the Lord, because that's where we all need to be. My challenge as we enter 2022, listen, ask questions, and surround yourself with good, smart people. And if we can do those things, I believe we'll change the world as well. Turn over to Luke. Luke has our application prayer.
Bow with me, please. Father, thank you for this day you've given us. Thank you for the lesson given by Josh, and just ask that you help us all take it into our hearts and soak it in, and just let it work in our hearts and help it mold us into who you want us to be, people who are more like you. Father, we have so much to be thankful for from family and friends to jobs to houses and homes to food and all, just so much. But Father, we thank you most of all for your Son and the blessing he was, and we just ask that you help us never take that gift for granted. We love you, Father, and in your Son's name we pray. Amen.